Yes. Wait, I'm just live streaming. All right.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming today. My name is Nadeem Matkour, and I will be your moderator for today. If I could ask everyone who is not speaking today to just briefly introduce themselves in the chat box, that would be great to start with. So as you may have witnessed in the past couple of days with the Asian Clean Energy Forum, or what we dub as ACEF, the Asian Development Bank is at the crossroad of an identity crisis. A quick look on their website would reveal to you their first identity. So a one that is shrouded under claims of transparency, sustainability, green recovery, and gender mainstreaming. It really doesn't take long to rake through the bank's other identity, a development bank which hides behind closed doors and is in a persistent fight against women, against indigenous people, and against the survival of this region. Our speakers today will offer you a brief glimpse of these decades of destruction. So we ask that you hold on to your questions and clarifications until our Q&A time at the end. I now call on Ryan Hassan, our Executive Director of the NGO Forum, to tell us why did civil society organizations in the Asia Pacific decided to disengage from the Asian Clean Energy Forum?
Thank you, Nadine. And before answering that question, I would like to welcome all our journalist friends, our civil society members and friends and allies who have been working on this tirelessly over the last period of the year. So just a quick look at historically the role of civil society inside the ADB Asia Clean Energy Forum. It hasn't been great. It hasn't been a great relationship. We've been knocking at that door for over a decade, and the ACEF has not opened up in a meaningful way for civil society to participate and discuss ADB's energy investments. By default, ADB's entire energy-related decision-making, ADB considers in that conversation to have the ADB itself, the governments, or the heads of state and their respective ministries and government agencies, and the private sector. So between these three decision-making bodies, all of ADB's energy investments are made for the public across the region. And as time progressed and we looked at the Paris Accord of 2015, we looked at the SDG goals coming around, we started to realize that us as people, as communities on the ground, we need to have a say in these big decisions around energy because our entire planet is at risk. So as the voice for inclusivity started to get louder, our push towards the ADB to include us in the ACEF proceedings also started to get louder. And we were given assurances last year by Director Yongpeng Zai, who's the head of the energy division under SDCC at ADB, that we will find a meaningful place in the table at the ACEF to discuss the energy policy. So in the run-up to that, we've had multiple conversations with the bank around the energy policy. Most of them have been demand-driven by us. I want to be very clear with this, with our friends in the media, that we asked for these meetings repeatedly across different sectors, and then the bank responded to talk to us. It was not a proactive effort. There was no scheduled timeline as to how the ADB is going to consult with civil society widely. There was no stakeholder engagement plan, which we have seen in other policy reviews at the ADB, for example, the safeguards policy. But the energy policy, this was all done pretty much swinging from the hip, as they say, right? It was very ad hoc. And only if you were screaming loud enough, they would listen to you and decide to talk. So by the time we come to the ACEF 2021, two issues were identified as limitations. Firstly, there was no clear explanation of the process of the consultation with civil society in the ACEF calendar. News was given super late. As late as June 7th, we were notified that we have to immediately organize a roundtable discussion of some sort. And then when we asked what would be the platform of the roundtable discussion, they pointed us towards an online platform where you cannot even interact with the bank on a one-on-one level. So it wouldn't be like this, like a video conference. it would be that we would type questions in, which would be further moderated by the ADB itself. So, and that's what they're calling out to be a roundtable consultation. So in our definition of what a meaningful consultation is, we just felt that we were not given prior informed understanding of the design, and the platform which was going to be used was going to suppress any independent thinking and voicing from our side. So we respectfully declined to attend that particular consultation. By saying we decline does not mean that we are closing our doors of engagement. We have seen the draft ADB energy policy. We are all critiquing different elements of it across fossil fuel financing and debating clean energy solutions. And hopefully once we have submitted our comments in, we will re-engage with the ADB in the spirit that they will now have a meaningful consultation with us with the details on that draft and listen to us and our points that we have to share with them. So in that spirit, I guess at this point, we had no choice but to disengage, and we look forward to engaging with the bank if the doors of engagement are meaningful. Back to you, Nadine.
Thank you, Ryan. We've said it one time and time again that consultation just goes beyond simply informing the community and CSOs. It has to be an empowering process at a level playing field, and the current process is definitely not at that exchange. I now call on to Avril de Torres from the Center for Energy, Ecology and Development, SEED, which is based in the Philippines, to basically give us a rundown on the ADB draft energy policy and their position on fossil fuels. Avril?
Thank you, Nadine. Good day to everyone. For SEED, we want to highlight 3 points regarding the draft energy policy. First, while we're glad to see finally in writing a coal ban and a coal phase-out policy, we call on ADB to also take accountability for its role in coal expansion in the region. This means including withdrawing from existing investments, not only new ones, and supporting the decommissioning and retirement of ADB-funded coal projects. Here in the Philippines, ADB-funded SEM Calaca and KEPCO Naga coal plants are among the many coal plants that went on outages in the past few weeks. This triggered a red alert and power outages in Luzon, all this in the middle of scorching summer heat and with many still working and attending classes at home. According to a senator's estimate, the outages cost Meralco electricity consumers more than 116 million pesos in just a few days. In connection to this point, we also note that the draft policy supports privatization. It has been 20 years since the Philippine power industry was restructured and privatized with the technical assistance of ADB, and it failed to bring about its promises of electrification, affordable electricity, better services, and energy security. Today, we're in this pandemic, experiencing power rate spikes, bill shocks, grid instability, and as mentioned earlier, power outages, even when there's overcapacity from coal. And amidst all this, government is grossly incompetent in holding the power oligarchs accountable. We call on ADB to assist its DMCs in reviewing the real impact of privatization in the power sector, especially the impact to electricity consumers paying for expensive but unreliable electricity from fossil fuels. This review should lead ADB to reconsider its support for privatization. And lastly, ADB should focus on bringing about sustainably powered economies and supporting renewable energy solutions, especially community-based ones, instead of fossil fuels. Several reports came out recently, the UNFCCC's NDC synthesis report, IEA's net zero report, and Oxford University's Are We Building Back Better? These reports tell us that there is urgent need and also unparalleled benefits in raising ambitions for the energy transition as we bounce back from this pandemic. So if fossil gas is necessary and economically viable for a DMC's energy transition, we urge ADB to let other financial institutions fund them. We need ADB focused on renewable energy solutions that will assist its DMCs to meet their fair and equitable share in the 1.5 Paris goal in the time and scale necessary. 1.5 Paris goal is also not set as a clear goal in the entire energy operations of ADB, only Paris alignment. And 1.5 goal is only mentioned with regard to gas projects. So we also call on ADB to be clear on this target. Even as the ACEF comes to a conclusion, we hope to finally have a genuine and meaningful consultation for us to be able to have discussion on these recommendations and many others from civil society and most especially frontline communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Avril. As we have all been seeing in the press and from our positions, the ADB has been touting energy access as the justification for financing or funding false solutions. But if these false solutions are not working from the onset, then why are you financing it? This begs the question. So I'm gonna call on to Suzanne Wong from Oil Change International and Fossil Free ADB Coalition to give us a rundown of their positioning on the ADB's energy policy. Suzanne?
Thanks so much, Nadine, and thanks to Forum for organizing this press conference and this opportunity to share. We are deeply concerned that the ADB draft energy policy appears to leave the door wide open for continued gas build out across Asia. Plans to expand gas infrastructure in Asia pose one of the greatest threats to meeting the goals of the Paris Agreement and averting the very worst impacts of the climate crisis. The ADB has spent over $4.7 billion on gas infrastructure since Paris. While the policy rules out oil and gas extraction and, as Avril mentioned, explicitly ends the ADB's direct finance for coal, the policy allows for continued gas finance with broad conditions. A staff guidance note on how the conditions will be applied has not been made public. If these conditions are loosely applied, they could allow for as much as 78% of the bank's gas finance since the Paris Agreement to continue, for a total of about $700 million a year. The ADB is playing a critical role in laying the groundwork for gas infrastructure development and expansion in Asia, particularly through its technical assistance program. The ADB approved over $11 million in technical assistance grants since Paris to help governments prepare to build out gas pipelines, power plants, LNG terminals across Asia. The ADB has been encouraging and facilitating the orientation of countries' energy sectors towards LNG imports. For example, in 2019, the ADB approved a grant for a feasibility study to identify where to build a new import terminal and LNG-fired power plants in Sri Lanka. And just last year, the ADB approved a $1.5 million technical assistance grant to prepare the 1,600-kilometer TAPI pipeline, which would transport up to 33 billion cubic meters of gas each year from Turkmenistan to Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India. The pipeline is designed to operate for 30 years. The ADB has financed gas plants in Bangladesh, Indonesia, Thailand, and more. As institutions are ramping up climate ambition leading up to COP26, the ADB is heading in the wrong direction. We can't afford to invest in the same dirty fossil fuels that created this climate crisis. Instead of acting as a bridge, gas is impeding the transition to clean energy and is acting more as a wall. The ADB's support for gas infrastructure is potentially locking in decades of new emissions that we cannot afford, placing countries at risk of asset stranding, consumers at risk of higher electricity costs, and exacerbating countries' debt burdens at a time when resources are needed to build back better from COVID. The ADB claims it is committed to climate action, and yet it's carrying on with business as usual, while our planet and our communities are suffering. The ADB's new energy policy must end financing for all fossil fuels and focus investments on helping countries leapfrog to clean energy. Thank you.
Thanks, Suzanne. Again, going back to the identity crisis, if you go onto the website, green recovery makes an appearance in almost every tab you would open on the bank. And yet they are, again, advertising or promoting false solutions. And this has been continuing in its financing for fossil gas for decades now, including in its controversial Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India gas pipeline project, as well as its really tarnished track record in the Rupsha 800 megawatts combined cycle power plant in Bangladesh, which not only has advanced its proximity to the suburban mangrove forests, but it's also threatening the livelihood of fisherfolk communities because of its waste. So again, why is the ADB continuing its legacy in fossil fuels? So I'm gonna call on to Dr. Renee now, who will hopefully give us a brief introduction into what do we mean when we talk about just transition. Dr. Renee?
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Nadine. You see, last night I spent the night rereading the draft ADB energy policy of issued last May. And then also I tried to review the program of Asia Clean Energy Forum this week, Monday to Friday. And the first thing that entered my mind is, you see, ADB came up with a very academic paper. You see, I'm from the academe. And it sounds good. This energy policy draft, they talk about renewables, alternatives, and so on, except for one major thing. And what is that? They forgot to mention, and also in this Clean Energy Forum, that the world has a deadline to meet. That by 2030, we should not allow global warming, the way we are feeling it now, to exceed 1.5 degree or at the most 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial era. In other words, what I'm saying, there is no sense of emergency on the part of those who wrote that energy policy and those who crafted this program for this week on clean energy. Because if they have this sense of emergency, the focus of the paper, the focus of this forum will be, how do we address now the transformation leading to a transition? And to do that, in the case of energy, there's so many things to be done. And the trade union movement, the International Trade Union Confederation, they have been raising this issue in the International Labor Organization. Yes, we need to change energy program from dirty to cleaner. But what happens to the communities hosting the dirty energy projects? What happened to the workers? So how do you arrange for the, will they have jobs tomorrow or today? You have to address the just transition. And the same with the adjustment. There are many, you can go area by area, transition. And that's why what is clearly missing, not only in terms of transition, in the case of this energy paper, the whole architecture of energy transition is missing. And I was so shocked after reading the paper. And as I mentioned already by our colleagues, the focus is on from coal to oil and now to fossil gas, which recent scientific findings indicate can be worse than coal because it produces methane, which is a worse GHG emitter compared to coal. Oh my God. And now there are different legislations, like in the Philippines, and then the different energy projects in South Asia. I see the focus is on this fossil gas. And so, and this will be in the coming years. So what happens to the target of 2030 of Paris Agreement? And so if you have transformation, you need to address transition, you need to address adjustment. And in doing so, you have to address the concerns of the people. And this is where the ADB NGF Forum is coming in. Where are the people? What is the role of the communities and the different island groups, the different member countries of ADB? And then in relation to all of these, well, what happens to the other framework that ADB should pursue? I'm referring to the Sustainable Development Goals. And the Sustainable Development Goals talk not only of planet, it talk of people, it talk of partnership, and then and all of this you have peace. So you have to bring this all together. So I challenge ADB, please go back and do your homework. In your homework, this the present draft, to me, I don't know about my colleagues, but to me is not acceptable because they are not addressing the main concern of humanity today, threat to humanity. This we are facing an emergency. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Renee. We can definitely feel your frustration, and we echo your sentiments as well. There is definitely absolutely no sense of emergency whatsoever in how the ADB conducts its day-to-day business. They are still promoting false solutions, and the whole architecture of sustainable development is just used as a PR by the bank and its people, which really provides us a great segue into our next cluster with false solutions, starting with Miriam Azurian from the Global Alliance for Incinerator Alternatives, Gaia Asia Pacific.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Nadine. I have several points to raise. First, the Global Alliance on Incinerator Alternatives Asia Pacific is outraged with the turnout of the Asia Clean Energy Forum, which has progressively been a platform for dictating what should be considered sources of clean and renewable sources of energy with the private sector. It has turned out to be a pitching event for private sector, especially waste incinerators, who package their polluting industry as waste to energy, burning tons of waste in your neighborhood, using millions of badly needed public resources in this period of recovery, which could have otherwise been solved through affordable, environmentally sound, and socially acceptable waste management options preferred by the IPCC, Stockholm Convention, and national laws which focuses on prevention of waste, recycling, recovery, and reuse, and the regulation of hazardous and toxic byproducts of WTE, or waste to energy. WTE is not clean nor a renewable source of energy, as ADB and the private sector is peddling in the past few days. A US study concluded that WTE incineration is the most emission-intensive form of power generation when both biogenic and fossil carbon are accounted for. The bank's continuous categorization of WTE as renewable energy is a deception to leverage public resources through guarantees and subsidies to empower industry polluters. Elsewhere, the European Union prohibits member states from using renewable energy subsidies to support waste incineration activities. The US Environmental Protection Agency, meanwhile, does not consider energy recovery as a waste minimization activity and rather prioritizes waste reduction at source. ADB's proposal is actually an outdated and unambitious proposal to low carbon pathway. Second is our response to the ongoing distortions made by the ADB on WTE. We have before welcomed the potential reforms in the ADB's draft energy policy. We cannot say the same today. In the previous days, ADB through the ACEF in a statement made through media today, ADB has stated that they are banning incinerators and are only funding waste to energy projects in its draft energy policy. We all know, even a new engineer knows, even a junior waste manager knows that, and even the industry knows that the economic driver of waste to energy is based on the amount and quality of waste it collects to be burned in the facility. If there is not enough and continuous supply of highly combustible waste in the municipality, WTE facilities will become stranded assets like many have ended up. Energy recovery from waste is only a secondary function of WTE, and this function is rarely achieved because municipality waste is largely wet waste, not compatible with the needs of WTE. Saying that when an incineration has proper emission controls, then it is already WTE. It's not different, it's the same. That's violative of many definitions of WTE in many countries. WTE facilities globally and primarily intended for waste management, not for producing electricity. The second distortion is saying that, and I quote, ADB does not work around local laws. We note that the robust policy, regulation, and compliance frameworks are required. This is doublespeak, as we know. Communities in Cebu are protesting a WTE project which ADB funded through a technical assistance project, despite a standing ban on waste incinerators. Third point, ADB is tinkering with the proposition that perhaps right-sizing WTE is the right approach, and the use of best technologies on emission controls is the right answer. We stand united that there is no right size for WTE. Any size of WTE has lasting detrimental effects to society and the environment already documented worldwide, including the emissions on mercury, dioxin, and furans, which can persist in nature without change for a long time. And exposure can impair immune, nervous, endocrine, and reproductive systems, and can increase a predisposition to cancer. Moreover, the best emissions control technologies can only work in a robust application of ADB safeguards and national environmental regulations, which in many independent evaluation studies of ADB do not exist. WTE is a distraction from the growth of renewable energy, from the pursuit of recycling and sustainable development goals of countries that will be critical to achieving an environmentally and socially just path to a low carbon future. We ask ADB to delist WTE from all of its investments, not only in its energy portfolio, but also in its urban development, sanitation portfolios. We stand united in solidarity with our members and partners in the Philippines, Maldives, Thailand, and Sri Lanka fighting WTE in their communities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Miriam. For a bank that is meant to alleviate poverty, they sure are perpetuating poverty even further. So in effect, there is a glaring disconnect between poverty alleviation, sustainable development goals, and what the bank is currently funding. So again, why are they perpetuating this divide? So we're moving into our next section with Gary Lee from International Rivers, who will basically brief us on the systemic problems with large hydro, which is another false solution that is currently promoted by the bank and currently occupies quite a large portfolio. Gary?
Thank you, Nadine. I'll try and keep it brief, but basically, in short, our position is that the ADB energy policy must prohibit financing to new hydropower projects. Currently, it still includes scope and is trying to promote this notion of so-called sustainable hydropower. And I'm just going to give a few examples. A key reason, and this is linked to the doublespeak that a number of the speakers have alluded to, large-scale hydropower is incompatible with the vision and the operational priorities that are outlined as part of ADB Strategy 2030, which is also meant to guide the energy policy. So one example, they talk about reducing poverty and addressing inequality, reducing inequality. Yet large-scale hydropower exacerbates inequality both within and between countries. Those that are benefiting are the developers, the financiers, yet communities that live by and rely on rivers for their lives and livelihoods are the ones that bear the most impacts of large-scale hydropower development. And moreover, those that bear the most impacts are routinely excluded from the decision-making process over whether these projects go ahead or not. I mean, one clear example, recent example, ADB has funded the Nam Nyet Wan Dam in Laos, which is selling electricity to Thailand. This is being developed. Two of the key developers, a subsidiary of Kansai, a major Japanese power utility, and the EGAT, which is the Thai state-owned utility. So they're benefiting from this project, yet this project has required the displacement over 3,000 people, in addition to the downstream impacts that people living along the rivers are experiencing. What's made this worse, this is selling electricity to Thailand, a country that has 18,000 megawatts in reserve margin. So this electricity is not needed. Where is that money going? It's going to the developers and financiers at the expense of communities. The second area is around the other operational priority ADB talks about is on tackling climate change, building resilience, and enhancing sustainability. Large-scale hydropower is not clean, it's not sustainable, and actually reduces resilience. Large dams are a major source of methane emissions, which is one of the most potent greenhouse gas emissions. Large hydro has caused major environmental impacts, and also in the context of climate change is a risky investment. So we saw in Cambodia in 2019, rolling power cuts, including in the capital in Phnom Penh, which was due to its over-reliance on hydropower and the extended drought. In 2018, we saw major flooding in parts of the Mekong Basin, which was exacerbated by large dams releasing water with sudden releases of water so they don't break. And this has had major impacts on communities living in the Mekong Basin. On third point, in relation to rural development and food security, which is another operational priority. We have seen dams cause major impacts, particularly in the region work in the Mekong Basin. So for example, that's the largest inland fisheries in the world, where fisheries make up 80% of the animal protein needs that people are consuming. And these dams have decimated fisheries. So one example is Nam Tin 2 Dam, which ADB was also involved in financing, where it resulted in changes in water quality, decline in fisheries, impacts on riverbank gardens on over 100,000 people that are living along the Zebang Phai. So these are just some examples of why large-scale hydro should definitely not be included in the ADB energy policy. It is long past due that ADB should get out of large-scale hydro and support better energy options that respect the rights of communities and protect rivers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gary. So we essentially have two energy sources here that are being promoted by the ADB, one of them being gas and the second one being large hydro, which they are promoting as false solutions and promoting as a necessary mean to transitioning. But as outlined by speakers today, these two solutions are actually perpetuating the climate change problem we're facing, the climate emergency we are currently living. So as outlined by Dr. Renee, gas is a potent source of methane, but also large hydro. So again, which begs the question, why are these on the portfolio? If there are better solutions that are more sustainable and that are affordable in the long term, why are we still fixated on these false solutions? And at the same time, these solutions, as mentioned by our speakers, they exacerbate the inequality issues we're facing, particularly as well to women who are bearing the brunt of this inequality and this model of development. Which leads me then to our final speaker before we head to closing, Tanya Lee Roberts, who will give us a quick dive into the private sector and in particular the operation of financial intermediaries.
Thanks, Nadine. I wanted to raise, coming from the forum's perspective, as well as the communities and member groups, the major concern with the prioritization of expanding the private sector in this draft policy, particularly in terms of its suggestion that it will speed up investments through putting forward the hope to get energy investments up to 1/3 of the portfolio. Now, this is concerning on a number of levels, particularly because of the fact that most alarmingly, the policy lacks any specificity on how to ensure that such private investments will meet the safeguard standards, will meet transparency and disclosure requirements, and will provide populations with the needed access to affordable, appropriately scaled energy options. Now, I just want to give a couple of brief points in regards to this. First of all, the policy suggests that there will be a major gear up of a focus on advising borrowing countries to open up their energy sector to privatization and scaling up public-private partnerships. Now, these are the very projects that from monitoring on the ground, it's very clear that too often they fail to take into account precautionary principles around first of all, starting off with no project or alternative project options, and they failed to undertake due diligence in terms of human rights monitoring, gender impact assessments, and environmental impact assessments, as well as making sure that they that there is free, prior, and informed consent of communities. And it's also particularly concerning that this is encouraged in the draft policy in relation to fragile and conflict affected states, where we know also from member groups reporting is that this is where there's absolutely no options for civil society groups to independently monitor projects without feeling concerned about potential reprisals or putting their security at risk. And then secondly, I just want to go into talking about the prioritization of financial intermediaries. Now, this is what is in effect, outsourcing decisions to invest in the energy sector. So there's a major mismatch when it comes to making sure that there will be, again, safeguard assessments, there'll be gender impact assessments, and that there will be a stated alignment with the Paris Agreement. Now, we need to look no further than a particular one, for example, investment that was recently approved just this past year of nearly $100 million US that has been offered to, for example, Clifford Capital, which has a portfolio that is heavily focused on fossil fuel investments, including LNG buildup in Malaysia and in Bangladesh, as well as the extractive sector in Mongolia. And the other problem with financial intermediaries that the draft energy policy alludes to is the scaling up of major sub-project dispersal regionally and in country. Now, the problem that again and again we've faced is that there is no disclosure of the sub-projects. And so people that are affected have no clue that these are actually partially supported by the ADB and advanced with public money. So in terms of what we would suggest moving forward for these the ADB in terms of their push towards financial intermediaries, first of all, we would call on them to disclose all of the sub-projects in advance of the project approval to ensure that there are thorough human rights impact assessments, gender impact assessments, and environmental impact assessments, and to make sure that these sub-projects will not contravene international labor standards or be implicated in international human rights abuses. And finally, that the investments should be ring-fenced to ensure that they stay away from being implicated with companies and projects that have no plan to get out of coal, oil, or gas, and are not involved in human rights violations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tanya. And no one knows better about human rights violation than our South Asia coordinator, Vidya Dinkar, who is also from the Indian Social Action Forum and Growth Watch India. I call on Vidya now to give us a brief overview of the South Asia positioning.
Thanks, Nadine. The South Asia position has been very clear right from the beginning. We thought that it's really, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever to really engage in, for example, the ACEF. We thought the Asia Clean Energy Forum is really a misnomer. It conjures up a kind of inaccurate image of what really goes on in there. First, it's not Asian, because alongside the ADB, USAID is one of 2 co-organizers of the ACEF. While 5 out of 7 donor agencies of the ACEF are from the northern hemisphere, and their bias towards the richer northern countries is also reflected in the workshops and in the side events that they have lined up. Community-led, decentralized, renewable energy systems are not included in the agenda, while there is a long list related with technology, investments, policy formulations. One of their donors, Australia, has the biggest coal mines, and those of us in India and Bangladesh, because of Adani and the big thing, we love to hate Australian coal mines now. And Japan is also one of the largest coal investors that we all like to rail against. So here they've not been discussing community-led energy systems, as some of our speakers said. And where is the discussion of justice for communities adversely affected? Where is the 100% renewable pathway? All of this is missing, and therefore representatives of civil society in South Asia decided early on, even before the forum formally decided, we will not participate, we will boycott the ACEF. It's just not Asian. More importantly, it's not clean. And I speak basis the considered position that we in South Asia arrived at, which is also there in our statement, which I'm sure Jen will share with all of you. And really for us, ACEF wasn't about us or energy for all in the climate emergency reality that is staring us in the face. So it's focused, all their sessions are focused on growing their own markets, their own business. It's focused on their investors. So why should we fool ourselves, we thought, or our communities, that this has some good import or good consequence for us, for our economies, for our environment, or for the climate crisis. This is just an annual event for those in the club to socialize, to expand their own markets, to talk about new technology and new investment areas, and really to see how they can make more connections and more money to line their own pockets and stuff in their bank and keep their northern investors happy. It's a virtual meeting of suits, really. And well, in our mind, they're caught with their with their trousers down. And it's not a pretty sight. So we just left them to it. Coming to the ADB's draft energy policy, it reflects the same anti-people bias. It's developed without any robust or meaningful inclusive consultation with affected communities with country level or regional civil society. India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh from South Asia are among the top 5 countries at the receiving end of ADB's energy-related loans and advice. Our governments are always being spoken to and advised on how they should move in their energy trajectory by the ADB. Yet, if the ADB is intent upon partnering with our governments and the private sector to roll these projects out, why can't they organize meaningful policy-based consultations with the same communities? They are carrying on projects on the ground across Asia and the Pacific. They can confirm progress, they can monitor on the ground. But when it comes to drafting the new energy policy, they use the excuse of the pandemic to deliberately not engage with stakeholders on the ground up and develop it in stealth, in a way. The ADB has been promoting private players and the private sector in the name of energy efficiency and renewables in our countries, not just mine. It's been promoting a private profit-led fossil fuel energy system in South Asia. And according to its own annual report, in 2020, ADB has invested 33.76 billion USD in the energy sector of South Asia, and 25.77% of their total investment in the region is in the energy sector. But out of the total energy investment done in South Asia, it's only 2.13% of their energy allocation in our countries that is in renewables, while 61.93 is towards fossil fuels and 34.21 for transmission and distribution. So we call upon them, instead of promoting expensive LNG in our countries, in Sri Lanka, in Bangladesh, and LNG related infrastructure, which is really expensive. Also in India, ADB is promoting northern corporations like Goldman Sachs and stuff like that in the renewable space. It's also promoting a very bankrupt Anil Ambani Reliance group to set up an LNG-based plant just outside Dhaka in Bangladesh. So the ADB has always said that we have limited resources. So then use those limited resources towards renewables. Why continue with business as usual? It's time to shift to community-based, decentralized, 100% renewable energy. Any fossil fuel, especially fossil gas commitments that the ADB is making now will only be commissioned in developing countries in our region in, say, 2025 at the earliest, maybe 2030. So so when are we going to phase out? You're locking us into a fossil fuels long term in the name of economic viability, etc. Where then are the ADB about real zero that we are talking of? What we are saying is cancel, pull out of such projects if your support is incongruent with your stated policy. You need to get out of fossil fuel projects and infrastructure right now, not when the draft policy is through as a standalone ratified policy. Remember, the independent evaluation department of the ADB also recommended this in 2020. So we don't really need to be patient with the ADB in 2021. I'll end with just our 2 demands from South Asia that we have put down in our statement. One, instead of posturing on clean energy, we said the ADB must first come up with a roadmap that categorically and clearly lays out the path towards an Asia that is 100% powered by renewable energy. It is only through this that we can finally say that the energy forum they regularly organize is truly Asian and clean. Until then, they have no business or right to organize it. 2, an energy policy through meaningful consultation with the affected and diversified communities on the ground and civil society at the national, regional, and global level. Nothing else. They can't do the sprucing up of their public image through these forums. We will not take it anymore. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vidya, and I really echo your demands. They say they are supporting developing member countries, but at the same time, their actions speak louder than their words, and they're lining the pockets of northern private corporations. So there's obviously a mismatch of the words vis-a-vis the actions. So I now open up the floor to Q&A from our journalists. So if you do have any questions, I would just recommend that you use the reaction raise hand before you speak your question. Otherwise, you're welcome to leave it in our chat box and I can read it out for you and our speakers can address that. Okay, and I'll leave you to think about your questions, but we received a question here from Facebook. Manoj Hazarika, are you demanding for hydropower development from ADB? What are the energy types that you are demanding for development? So I'll call on Ryan to answer this one briefly.
Thanks, Nadine. I think that's a very good question in terms of, if we're saying no to coal and no to gas, then where are we heading, right? So to a certain extent, what we are really heading towards is a full transition towards renewable energy, which is using the energy of the sun and then using the energy of the wind to produce electricity in a safe and clean way. And not only for rooftop revolutions for households or mini and off-grid solutions for rural communities, but a full-scale industrial and economic transition towards renewable energy. So all of this goes utility scale. So this leads to the question around better quality solar photovoltaic panels. It leads to the question around better windmills. It leads to the question around, are the grids ready to transition towards full-scale renewable energy? So there's a lot of economic space for financiers, and I'm not only talking about ADB, but financiers in general, to invest towards a renewable energy future. So it's a question really on ADB. I mean, are they looking towards a really green energy future for the region? Because there's a lot of space there for people to come in. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Ryan. We would now welcome further questions from our journalists. Again, if you do have any questions, you're welcome to type it into our chat box or can raise your hand and speak your question to the panel.
Hi, I have a question.
Yep, please go ahead.
So, to what extent is ADB engaged with intermediaries and with whoever gets the project in terms of deciding how they spend the money? So, for example, in case ADB funds an LNG project, or in case ADB funds a solar project, to what extent is their role in deciding how it's done? Because if we talk about hydropower, it really depends on whether it's small scale or if it's a big grotesque 3000 megawatt project. So a lot of it depends on the scale. So to what extent can I ask ADB to tell me how much are they engaged and how much is it only up to the people who take it ahead, like intermediaries or even the private companies?
Thank you so much for your question. Tanya, I'll let you answer this one on intermediaries.
Sorry, actually, my internet just cut out. Can you quickly reiterate the question? I'm sorry.
So to what extent is ADB in charge of the project design? So once ADB funds a project, whether on its own or through intermediaries, to what extent is it in charge of the design of the project, like in terms of scale, in terms of engagement with the communities, what they want? So in all, like all details, all nitty-gritty, who decides?
So for financial intermediaries, it's just done through dispersed sub-projects. So for example, like the issue of just giving, let's say, 100 million investments into Clifford Capital. Then they've also done this in terms of various power companies in the Mekong region. Those companies then and equity investments then have the option to invest in different types of projects. It's not disclosed. So it means there's no follow-up and not any possibility to know how those projects are being designed, how they meet with the safeguard standards, how those projects actually roll out in terms of, yeah, as we said, like being ring fenced. So there's no ring fencing in terms of knowing what the design is or making sure that they would align with any climate related standards either. Ryan or others can add in particular examples.
Vidya, can you tell us about an example in their region of a financial intermediary and how did they decide on the project design in South Asia?
So it's not only intermediaries, like even when ADB funds directly. So who decides the design? Who decides?
Who decides how much we know or how much we get to know? Rishika?
No.
Is that your question?
So if it's a project that ADB funds directly, so to what extent are they actually engaged with people on the ground? To what extent are they aware of the scale? And if it funds it through intermediaries, then even then, to what extent is design really in line with ground realities, and what does ADB know, what does it doesn't know?
So what we have seen in some projects is that like international consultants will come in and design. So very often the design of the project itself is flawed because it's not from the ground up, it's not with a real understanding. And if civil society and communities are really, really alert early on and push for change and something does give, then this constant engagement with community, we feel, is a skill that ADB has not developed despite its long association in the Asia and the Pacific. So there is some diffidence. Maybe they have the best intentions, but we do not see this on the ground. Even with something like COVID-19, Rishika, we see that, whatever money came in good faith and pretty early, by 29th of April 2020, India already had a huge chunk of money from the ADB to handle it. But where has it all gone? It came to the Ministry of Finance, to the Department of Economic Affairs. It was supposed to go to so many of these social protection measures, but we are unable to trace the money. Okay, and the ADB has not come up with a monitoring report. So therefore, you see this disconnect. Often it is groups like ours that are trying to connect communities that are affected and the ADB personnel, but it's an extremely slow and frustrating process, believe me. And where even we want to give up, saying this is not going anywhere. It's like you're fighting them all the way to try and convince them of something that is so apparent that communities are struggling on the ground. And this disconnect, and see, what are we trying to say? We are saying your draft energy policy is saying this, walk that talk. Your independent evaluation department has already said this to you, walk that talk. You cannot have a Jamshoro coal-fired plant going on and that project going on in Pakistan and say, oh, no more coal. We have a coal ban in place. This kind of double speak is what we are dealing with within the ADB.
Can I respond to that question, Nadine?
Of course. Yes, of course.
Okay, thank you. I'm Hemant Witange from Sri Lanka. Actually, ADB support the countries with making national policies as well. I mean, so here we are talking about the the ADB policy in general. But then, so ADB also give the technical assistance to the country to decide what that policy is. Actually, in that policy framework, they identify which type of projects they want to come. For example, in Sri Lanka, of course, ADB has decided no to coal, but the LNG plant is there. It's a 350 megawatt plant they are proposing. Now, once they decide which type of projects they want to have, so then they give a technical assistance for the countries, which money will spend for making the environmental impact assessment. During the environmental impact assessment, they consult public, they consult various other stakeholders, and it can happen in two levels. Actually, in certain countries, they consider the local environmental impact assessment as the environmental impact assessment for the ADB. But then the ADB provides a summary environmental impact assessment document, which has 120 days for public commenting period. For example, in the case of Sri Lanka, we have only 30 days public commenting period for the EIA. And based on these consultations, they decide which project. And many of those projects are not totally funded by the Asian Development Bank alone. And in particular, Sri Lankan projects, 350 megawatt LNG projects, they get the money from the AIIB as well. So Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank also put the money. So it's mostly the countries get co-funding. Is in today's context, not a single agency provide money for the infrastructure project. So the country has to look for money. Sometimes the ADB put their effort to bring all other money. So that's how what ADB does. Therefore, so sometimes it's very hard for us to identify which agency and which safeguard policies really we need to consider. But there are countries that consider country systems or the agency systems. For example, in India, the Road Development Authority, when they give the money to the RDA, so they consider that as a agency safeguard system. But ideally, so they consider they produce their own environmental impact assessment given by their consultants, but they have to respect to the safeguard policy. So that's how they choose the projects to fund. Thank you.
Thank you, Hemanta. I hope this answered your question, Rish. We have time for just one brief one. I see someone raising their hand. Joy, you are welcome to speak.
Yeah, thank you. I am Joy from Bangladesh. I like to address the question of how the ADB work in country level. In Bangladesh, they have also residence mission in every country. And government, mainly ADB works with the government. And in this case, with government, the private company also engaged with this process. That the government demands some fund from the ADB, they make a concept paper, and ADB make the assessment, it is viable or not. Then they agree that then ADB has 5 years country plan for every country. Based on this, that issues, the private company can also engage with government and ADB. So directly now the private company is engaging with ADB. It is a very risky thing that we are addressing in Bangladesh. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Joy. Hassan Mehdi, would you like to answer this one?
But it is not a question.
I think it's not a question. Yeah.
It's not a question, it's a statement. Would you like to respond to the statement?
No, it's okay. Yeah.
Okay, no worries. Okay, we'll head back then to Hemanta for our closing statement if there's no further question. However, if you do have any questions, and answered after going back and reading our PR kit, you're welcome to reach out to us via our email, or if there's a specific speaker you would like to clarify anything, you're also welcome to bridge that conversation separately. We'll head now to our closing with Hemanta, and thank you all for listening today.
Thank you very much, Nadine. The ADB is a policy bank, so they make their own policies. At the same time, they're supporting the countries to have their the national level policies. For example, in Sri Lanka, ADB has supported to make a national policy, And in this national policy, they have hired a coal consultant to give the national policy. Unfortunately, the coal consultant has given a bad comments about the renewable energy and promoting the fossil fuel. Now, it took for us almost like 30 years to convince the ADB that they should go away from the coal funding. So ADB is a fossil bank. So all these years, ADB supported LNG and all the sort of dirty energy and also especially the coal until this draft policy came out. So therefore, I think ADB has to respect to the new findings about the climate change, because our communities are already suffering from climate change, and there are so many people in Bangladesh, India, Sri Lanka, Philippines, and all these especially small island countries are suffering from climate change, and there are a lot of climate induced migrations. So the ADB has to understand that every dollar they are spending in our countries for coal power or on other fossil fuel, LNG, so they are contributing to build this climate refugees or the climate induced migration. So on the other side, once they give the money to the fossil industry, so they cannot give money for building resilience for climate. So these are the double-edged sword that ADB is playing at the moment. But we know that the ADB major countries, which is the Japan is converting all their coal power plant into the wood pellet, which is again a very bad practice. United States, many of the coal power plants now they have converted to the wood pellet industry. So this burning biomass is another one. So in Sri Lanka, ADB is supporting the national the LNG plant with the support of the AIIB. Actually, the unit cost is like 15 rupees Sri Lanka. At the same time, ADB has supported a wind power plant in Sri Lanka. Unit cost is only 10 rupees. Now, I cannot understand why ADB is supporting this LNG plant with a higher cost, which the local communities has to pay when there's more wind potential actually. So this wind plant even set up with a radar system for emergency shutdown if the bird's flying very near, so it can immediately shut down. And 2 days ago, the project director spoke to me and he thanks the civil society for pushing for an emergency radar system and respect to the ADB safeguard policies. And he said that we are producing very, very cheap energy by now from renewable energy. So the ADB has to look at the renewable energy like solar, the wind power, and also so there are a lot of potential for us to use the wave power. So without doing this kind of renewable, ADB is going to satisfy their donor countries like Japan, US, and all these European countries. For they can invest in coal power. They can invest in LNG plants and the other fossil fuel, big hydros, so which they can make their money by still putting the poorer countries or the developing countries in problem. The climate affected communities are in problem. So therefore, so we are very clear that this Asia Clean Energy Forum is not for us, that this is actually serving the purpose of the major donor countries, and they want to invest in this fossil industry. So that is why they are spending money. So therefore, we have decided this time, if they are not going to give us a seat in the consultation room, if they are not going to listen to our cases, our ground experience, then there's no point of sitting with these people in the Asia Clean Energy Forum. So therefore, we have decided to boycott, and we will continue to dialogue with the ADB. But at this moment, we are not going to engage with the Asian Development Bank on this clean energy. So I hope you got the message very clear, and I want to thank everybody attended this meeting, who organized this meeting, especially Ryan Hassan and Jen and others, Nadine, who was behind organizing this press conference. Thank you so much for attending this press conference.
Thank you, everyone.